I went to paradise alone. This sucks. Like, I want my friends here. I want my family here.
Meet Sabeeha Banubhai, the founder and CEO of Jack Studios. She is a creative soul and thought leader who dives deep into the art of connection, self-expression, and personal growth. She unpacks the essence of community, the power of therapy, and the widespread loneliness that many individuals experience.
What would you say to 18-year-old Sabeeha right now? If you weren't the CEO of Jack, what would you be doing?
Being an artist.
Why?
It's actually what I wanted to do. And what I do, I paint a lot, I write, and I'm actually a photographer as well. So yeah, I'd love to actually delve deeper into the world of art and creation and expression. Yeah.
Why does that excite you?
I feel a lot inside, and I think and the things I relate to is through expression and through art. So watching movies, cinema, music, literature, an escapism, I guess, from the real world. And yeah, that's something that resonates deeply with me, and being able to create art that other people resonate with. I'd love to be part of that, yeah.
And growing up, were you exposed to any sort of creativity from a, expression point of view?
Bollywood. Yeah, I mean, I loved Bollywood music and cinema, and it was also something done a bit hush-hush because my dad's family were very religious, so my mom sort of exposed us at home to it. And then I was always an artistic kid, and my mom never really knew what to do with us, like school holidays. We grew up in a small town, so there was a art store that used to host school holiday programs. So all my cousins, they would just drop us off and then pick us up a few hours later. So got really into the painting and arts and crafts with all the old nannies, basically. Yeah, and as far back as I can remember, I was always. That's actually what my grand thought I did for many years, because they remember me painting. And I went to an art school, so they didn't know what IT was or what software was, and I never tried to explain it. So she thought I sold paintings for a living for a long time.
And growing up in that small town, what lessons stood out for you that you still kind of, would apply in your day-to-day now?
I think the value of community, I don't think I valued it as much because you didn't know. And if anything, I ran away from it because everyone knew your business, if you're kissing a guy on the side of the road or whatever it was. But I think after moving away and being alone for a long time, and also seeing the commoditization of community now, I realize how we've taken for granted and how much it's needed to be able to have a neighbor and a friend and to have your cousins around. Yeah, everyone knew everyone was there to help everyone. It was very much a diasporic Indian community as well. So your accountants, your doctors, your butcher, your grocers, everyone was someone you knew or were related to and that looked like you. So I actually grew up in quite a bubble, at least in my early years. It was only, I think, when I was 15 that I actually saw the outside of that bubble. And then obviously I realized I actually fitted in more on the outside than on the inside. But now growing up, I'm okay, I need to find my own inside. I need to create community and not necessarily pay to create this community, but to do things for each other, pick me up from the airport, or, you're sick and people are bringing food over, or just things like that, where I think we now pay for a lot of these services that were done out of kindness growing up.
Interesting. So why do you think that people don't do those things out of kindness? Or is it that we just now have realized in this busy world that, you could actually just pay for it instead of inconveniencing someone to ask you for that favor?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is we also isolated. I don't think people live in community anymore or try to create community with the people they live around. Like I moved away at 18 to Centurion at the time, and I knew no one else who didn't necessarily have the social skills to get to know people, and they weren't people that necessarily looked like me either. Whereas when you're growing up, like those systems are in place, those communal events are in place for you to meet and mingle, and then for the next generations to start taking over certain responsibilities. Whereas I don't think that's in place, especially in the cities, from what I've noticed and what I've heard from a lot of people. And then your people end up being in other places. So to ask for a favor is a massive inconvenience if someone has to drive an hour to do something to help you. And then you just start getting so busy in your 20s and you don't prioritize it, unfortunately. Or I didn't. At least I didn't know the value of it. Because also, I mean, the bad comes with the good. It's not all good and great. It was also very traumatizing for everyone to have an opinion on your life and to be raised in a collective society. Like, I have 70 plus cousins.
Wow.
So we weren't all in the same town, but we were in each other's lives a lot. And my aunts and uncles and second cousins. And, you know, if you did something, everyone had an opinion. And especially if you didn't necessarily fit in, which I didn't, into the mold, I realized that I wasn't given the support either at that point. So you also need to fit into and belong within the community in which you operate. And I didn't at the time, so I left. But now I crave that. And I'm seeing it commoditized because people are so lonely these days, and everyone is, you know, realizing money can't fill certain holes, and you can't actually pay people, or it doesn't feel as good if you pay people to do certain things. And I think we're filling that gap with paid services even further. And that's something I'm a little iffy about.
And how do, speaking about this loneliness epidemic, how does one then become part of a community? Does it have to be from the individual taking that initiative? Or are there not, like you said, those systems in place like there was in the past, where you actually live in and grow up in communities? Now you actually have to go out and find them. How does one get out of that?
I think work from my world has played a big part in community, like especially post-COVID, on intentionally trying to gather people. I mean, again, it's paid activities a lot of the time, but you start mingling in the same circles, you start seeing each other, you start dating each other. I think that's what I've seen happen, but you have to show up and you have to subscribe to the community, essentially. But I'm seeing it in small ways, especially because I'm looking for it. And because I've been traveling the last year, I'm lonely, and that's what I'm like, okay, how do I make a friend? And now I'm currently in Paris. Like, what do I do? Like, who do I know? Who can I call? You start to search for things, and that's when you start seeing things like, oh, there's a picnic happening, or there's that not everything is necessarily paid, but it's opt-in, as opposed to like you have to opt out, which I found happened in the smaller communities. Like, if someone died, you had to say you weren't going, you were expected to be there, and be part of it and help. There's like food and setup and car management and this community around that, whereas now you have to like RSVP, like, okay, I'm coming for this event that's happening, and waiting to be invited. Whereas if there was like soccer night on Friday, like you knew the community was pitching up and someone had food going. Like, that's what I grew up in, and I didn't realize like how accessible networking was because I was a kid at that time. And now I'm seeing how it's trying to be created. It just doesn't seem to be there. And I think COVID played a massive part in that as well, of like structures falling apart and people just also maybe enjoying it falling apart, like realizing that they were stuck in maybe communities they didn't want to be in, and now trying to actively find where they fit in.
In terms of that loneliness part, how does that play into an individual's overall well-being from a mental health point of view. I know that you're an advocate for
Yes.
healthy well-being. So, I'm sure that loneliness is one of the biggest cause of a poor mental state.
Loneliness and stress, I would say, are the two silent killers. You don't realize, and you can't pinpoint it unless you do. There's no test. There's no blood work that you could do to say, hey, maybe you need a hug, maybe you need community, maybe you need someone to talk to. The same way, it's like, how do you test your stress levels? Like, sure, you can test for adrenaline, but if you go for a run, it could be healthy for you versus, getting fired. I think I can talk from my perspective and the people that I've met. There's a lot of shame as well in a lot of that, in being lonely, in admitting you are lonely, admitting that the life you have worked so hard for may not be as fulfilling, that there are parts missing, especially if you have money. Everyone's like, but you have money. Like, why are you unhappy? You're traveling the world. Why are you lonely? Why is that a need for you? Don't get married. Like, it's a trap. And I'm like, but both sides of the trap. Owning a business is a trap. Like, but I think as humans, we were not created to be islands. And I went to paradise alone and I was like, this sucks. Like, I want my friends here. I want my family here. And it's only having left everything that was given to me on a silver platter in that regard that I've started to value it so much more and be more intentional in creating traditions and systems that also work for me. So, for example, Friday lunch with my mom and family is something that's, as much as possible, something that I do. The traveling, it's been hard, but when I'm in the same province, at the very least, regardless of where in that province, even if I have to drive 2 hours to have that lunch, my mom, regardless of who shows up, she's cooking that meal, whether there's 2 of us at the table or there's 15 of us at the table. And it's a system that's in place. And it's an open invitation. Come if you're around, come if you're hungry. Let me pack some stuff for you. You sit around a table and talk. How is your week? What's happening for you? And just having someone ask, how are you doing? And actually want to know the answer. And you can bitch and moan and actually be honest. You don't have to censor it. And they're on your side. They don't actually care what the other person did unless you actually messed up. They're on your, like, my mom's on my side, And I think a lot of people don't have that. They don't have that sense of support systems and structures and just someone to talk to, as simple and as complicated as that. And I think it has a massive, massive impact on your mental health and rates of anxiety, depression, even physical illness, I think, not that I'm a doctor yet, to be attributed to the fact that we are now living in cosmopolitan jungles by ourselves, trying to navigate a very capitalist society alone in sole pursuit of money to survive, to pay bills, to have food and a roof and water. Like, people are not trying to thrive always, they're just trying to survive, and they're doing that alone. Whereas I think historically it was done as a tribe and as a collective of people. And I think that's, like, the more we live alone in apartments and drive alone in cars, the more we are contributing to that epidemic, I think. And you're working more to be more alone so you can afford the things that you've subscribed to.
Got you. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I think I want to ask about solutions. We're speaking you spoke a lot about the symptoms and, actually, maybe let's dive a bit into the symptoms of, we spoke about the cause, but really going into that, the symptoms around being lonely, right? What I'm hearing from that is this deep need for connection. And it's not just a one-way street. It's, you want to be heard, but you also want to listen. What am I missing out in terms of, like, the symptoms of, like, what do you crave?
Yeah, it's connection and affection. to like my therapist also listens to me, but she doesn't give me a hug at the end of the session. I think physical touch is largely lost. As I said, that's what I think COVID had a massive impact on. It's like elbowing, high fiving, and I'm like, I need a hug. How do I just say this? Like I just squish my life back into my body so that I can not live in this existential realm that I'm in. I mean, I even saw some studies on like platonic cuddling and how that has actually like helped physically. I don't have all the stats, but yeah, I think if we talk about the symptoms, I think you become an extremist in the thing you can control and the thing you do have. That's what happened to me. I knew how to work and I got validation and affection from the success that other people saw. So I craved that and I did more of that, as opposed to saying, hi, can we actually just, I don't want to have dinner alone.
Got you.
Then it's like, okay, cool, I'm having all these work meetings and I'm seeing these people and they think I'm important and they think there's an exchange of value here. But it's so transactional. There's not just, let's Bry and Kayer, talk shit. It's professional, and there's all these facades and these rules of engagement around these things. And when you let that guard down, it's like, oh my God, what is like, it freaks people out sometimes, And yeah, I think you just defeat. I think there is a defeatism in terms of like a belief that gets created of there's no such thing as friends. You can't work with your friends. You can't trust your family. People are going to take advantage of you if you have. And then that gets passed down. And we don't realize how the beliefs we have unconsciously created through our lived experience that we have simulated gets passed down to the next generation. And eventually I question whether family is even going to be a thing that is honored and valued. Like, do you show up for your parents? Do you take care of your grandparents? Or is that something you throw money at and put somewhere? Like, my gran grew up with us. My cousins lived in our house because they needed help. Like, our living situations also can't accommodate people anymore. Like, we've got a 1-bedroom. Like, if my mom is ill, I'm like, oh God, you're inconveniencing me. Like, let me pay to sort this out instead of, hey, come home. And I think that concept of home is missing. And I don't think we're also equipped to create home that other people feel at home with us.
Before solutions, so do you think that we can essentially build this home, this community, as well as thrive in the material world?
I don't think they're separate things.
Okay.
I also come from families that worked together, that built businesses together, that shared in the resources of things. And I think that separation is also what creates animosity and the lack of sharing. Like, I now have resources and I'm happy to share, and people get very weirded out when they hear that I do, in the sense of like, people phone, I need my rent paid, or I need this, or I need that. And I'm like, I have and I'll share, and then in return, this is what I need. I'm actually really loyal. Can I come over for dinner? Do you mind, like you having a kid, like I need some baby time, or I have different needs. I don't have financial needs, so it doesn't make me not needy. I just need to know that it's okay to ask for that to be returned. So I think there's also we don't share resources. We don't share our assets and our abilities freely and in exchange for stuff. Obviously not just one way. I've also experienced that, and that's not a comfortable space to be in. Regardless of what you're giving, whether you're giving too much of love or you're giving too much of money. But I don't see that a lot. I mean, even today, like the same communities I grew up in is so different. Like, it's not to say that it's still fully existent. Even in my family units, like my family is so scattered in pursuit of money, in pursuit of this better life, and we want to live in the city. We don't want to live in the small town anymore, or we're going to study and or we didn't study, we want our kids to go and study. And then it just, yeah, it has this, it's not that it's negative things to want, it's just, I think no one knew the consequences of what that actually looked like and how fragmented of a family and community system you end up with.
So what needs to change to essentially have both?
I think I'm very much in pursuit of that answer myself. But I think conversation is a really good place to start, to talk about and be honest of what's worked, what hasn't worked, what we can do better. A nice agile retro. And iterate on that, and I think that's something I sat and did with myself, at least, and communicated to my family. Like, also with the traveling, I've now, when I'm in Joburg, I live with them, which is a very new experience, and I ask them for help. I've never really, like, when I left home, I felt abandoned and I self-abandoned, and I stopped asking for help because I thought I had to do everything by myself. And I blamed them for not helping naturally. And I realized, okay, but did you ask? Did you tell anyone that you don't have money for medication? Did you, you've got family that are doctors. Someone could have arranged for something. But I didn't feel like I could ask, or that it was okay to ask for help. And I think if we can, sit around a fire, break some bread, and actually just ask for what we need, get more in touch, people are struggling in all kinds of ways, and we have the resources to help each other. I think it's a starting point instead of,
on asking for
away.
help. I think you've touched a nerve there, because this has to be a universal problem. What had to change for you to actually get over it? That, not asking for help, and to to get to the point where you could be comfortable to just be like, hey, I need help.
It's only been a year since I started, I would say, asking for help. 2 years since I started professionally asking for help. So professionally, burnt out is an understatement for what happened. I crashed physically, mentally, emotionally. The minute I felt safe and everything was going to be okay, I completely crashed, and I realized that if I don't get help right now, I don't know if I'm going to be around or if I would want to be around anymore. And that's when I started therapy. To me, that was the gateway drug to asking for help. Yeah, it took a long time of unpacking, of like shedding the independent woman facade, which that's all it is. I'm not an independent. No one is an island. No one is that independent. They don't need anyone, or that they shouldn't ask for help, or that they should always pay for help. And it went through this whole process of unlearning, of getting back in touch with my needs, of actually trying to hear my body speak. I mean, that's how disconnected I was. It wasn't even asking for help for anyone. Even my body was screaming for help, and I couldn't hear it because I was in hustle mode, working 16 hours a day, 2-3 jobs, studying, this, that, just making money. And yeah, eventually when my body was like, I don't care how much more money like you make, like I'm not moving, like can't get out of bed, like can't eat, like not even needing the bathroom because your body is not working to that extent. As I started learning to have a better relationship with myself, I started looking around and I was like, oh my goodness, I have so many transactional relationships. Where are my parents in my life? Like, when last have I made the effort to reconnect? The friends I have are the people I've worked with. The friends I grew up with, we don't have a connection anymore, or I've lost all these people. And it's easy to feel like everyone abandoned you. And I'm like, what did you do? Other than just accept that someone hasn't phoned you? Have you tried to phone them? How do they know you in need? When I started traveling last year, so I packed my whole life into storage September last year, and that's when I started needing help. I could have paid for a lot of things, but literally the goal was like, with my therapist, like ask someone to take your bag down from the cabin because you're really short and you really struggle, or ask for a lift to the airport instead of Ubering. ask for someone to look after your plants, because I had 25 house plants that I couldn't put into storage. They needed to be taken care of, and they're massive plants. I was like, shit, okay, ask someone to do this. Ask someone to stay over without paying for it because you're in town. Oh my gosh, what an experience. And some people showed up. I lost some friendships because I started asking. And the weird thing is, I was a giver. So I was used to being asked. I was doing a lot. I was giving a lot to the same people. And when I started asking for what I thought was small in comparison, it changed the whole dynamic of the relationship, because the relationship was built on them receiving in a lot of ways. So yeah, this process has also started like shifting my world, but it's the people that have left for the better, not easily and not unpainfully, but it has brought in a whole new world of humans and a whole new world of myself to give in kind. And I've received in kind, and I've realized that everyone, if given the opportunity, there's a lot of people that are willing to just do a nice thing and build a relationship.
Also, what I'm hearing from that is you took responsibility and you asked, oh, actually, I could have sent a message. I could have actually asked for help and not play the victim. That's the first thing. And the second thing, not being a people pleaser and putting yourself before others.
Yes.
How do you put yourself before others without being disrespectful, rude, without the fear of them may walk away?
Yeah. Facing those fears. So my two biggest fears were fear of rejection and fear of abandonment. Because that's what I experienced growing up, in terms of I'm so different. Even though no one's saying it, I feel abandoned and I feel rejected in a lot of ways. Especially my dynamic with my father was a big part of that, because he obviously had an idea of who he wanted me to be, to have his own identity validated in society, if that makes sense. And it's been a long journey. It is a long journey, and I'm nowhere near where I would say I feel safe enough in those environments to be fully myself. It's not everything is as extreme as that. If someone says no, they're not saying you're a terrible person and they never want to speak to you again. I think especially if you've never asked for something and you ask and you get rejected, you like cower and you run away,
you
right?
take it personally.
You take it so personally. And it's okay to take things personally, but you don't need to create the reasons why someone said no, unless they told you no because you're a terrible person. I don't want to do this for you. It's usually,
that's a good point.
No, I don't have the time. No, this isn't going to work for me. Not now. So many reasons. And unless you've asked for that reason, don't create a reason to not ask again from someone else or to the same person. Like for me, it came with like wanting to hang out with my friends and getting no a lot, or getting cancelled on often or a lot. But it wasn't because they didn't want to hang out with me. It was, something, especially in your 20s, something is always happening. I don't know what goes on in our life, whether we also have bad relationships with work, then you're working late, or you're really tired, or you're sick, or your partner needs attention, and then you fall down the priority scale.
If you have trouble, the first automatic thought would be, oh, it's financial trouble.
Yeah.
And financial trouble is so extreme that it's associated with being like the only real problem.
Yes.
Sorry, let me put it that way. But what we're speaking about essentially is 99% of the other things.
Yeah.
Finance, money is just, a medium to get you the things that you want.
Yeah.
But the 99% involves everything else. And so how do you communicate to others that actually this is also a problem, like not having money?
Yeah, and it is a constant thing until I have very personal, vulnerable conversations with people. From the outside, they even tell me what their perception of me is. And, I have to really sit down and I say to them, like, yes, I've made money, but what I've had to sell to make that money, I can't buy back.
Sacrifice.
Yeah.
Mm.
You know, like no matter how much money I have, I can't actually buy a true friend. There isn't a service for that. I can't get my gran back, and she passed away, you know. There's so much of that you don't realize, you don't know what's important because you are told money is so important. And unfortunately, it is because the system is created in such a way that you need so much of money to live like above the poverty line, above suffering, that you go in pursuit of this for much of your life. And when you have suffered, you don't want the generation after you to suffer. And that's what I sat with a lot, was the generational trauma of like, how did I get here? And how am I so different to the people I'm seeing around me? Because I have now elevated in such a way that my communities are not me. They're not the people I grew up with. It's people that come from diverse and very different backgrounds, but so many of them don't necessarily have the same paths or the same reasons that they got here. Like, I didn't start a business because I wanted to start a business. I started a business because I needed food. And then once I started making money, I then needed to help my family pay bills, you know? And that's the reason that it kept me in a place of needing money, was because someone else that I loved needed money because they didn't have the opportunities that I have. So it is now my responsibility to give back, because they helped me get here, even if it was just saying get out of the house, because otherwise you're going to get into a very different system. And I look back, and because I grew up in a community for many years that looked like me, I never thought we didn't belong here or that we weren't from here. And to actually sit with like, oh, I'm a child of immigration, you know, and some of that immigration was forceful and some of it was by choice, but a lot of it was in pursuit of life and of money. And my grandparents didn't study, they worked. And not even all of them, my grandfathers, and they worked menial jobs for menial pay and birthed children who wanted a better life. And those children met other forms of resistance and then had more than their parents had, but not as much as the next person next to them. So they built up resentment of like, my child will go to university because I didn't go to university. And then it birthed us who now have all of this and are like, okay, but it's like, how do you tell your parents who have never seen this sort of money that I'm still lonely? You're like, grow up. What do you mean you're anxious? Like, when I started talking about my mental health, the eyes rolled. Like, oh, these kids of today, they don't understand how hard we've had it, how hard we have it, that they still can't pay rent because they don't have the skills or the networks in place to survive. So they're like, you should be happy. You climb that corporate ladder. That's all I wanted for you. And now I sit here and I'm like, if I'm going to have kids, what do I want for them? And you start tracing back these generations, and then you start questioning, how did we get here? And then where to from here? Because you can't go back. You can't just like roll back a version on GitHub and say, cool, let's go back, because we are such different people and we live in such a different world right now.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point there about breaking the cycle of that generation trauma. I think that, I mean, you know, I'm trying to get to where do we start? And that, of course, what I'm hearing from that is also your immense and very self-aware of, okay, cool, this is why you're here, or this is the baggage that you're carrying, which possibly isn't even yours.
No, it's not.
And also what I'm hearing you say is getting into that subconscious and uncovering and unpacking what's in there so you can release those beliefs, limiting beliefs, so that you can move forward. Getting into the finance part of things, how did you change your relationship with money?
I have a serious fear of failure, because failure to me means possibly arranged marriage. It means going home and going home is not a safe space. It's not a space that can provide for me. Failure means having, I think the hardest thing having left home was realizing the invisible pressure placed on seeing me as an experiment out in the world, and how I did was going to determine what the generations after me were going to be allowed to do.
Interesting.
So if I went out and failed, and failure was not just financial failure, no one expected me to financially succeed. They just didn't want me to, mind my French, fuck my life up so much that gave them enough ammo to never let another female child out into the world again. If I got pregnant, or I, had multiple relationships, or whatever was unacceptable to the community that I came from, it would say, don't be like her. This is why you can't study. Or if I went and chose art instead of, the pharmacy or doctor route that is acceptable for the girls to do. Obviously as the generations changed, more and more became acceptable, but still within 3 or 4 realms of okay, be useful to society, be a teacher, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an accountant, whatever. And I was like, I want to be an artist, and I'm actually going to a private school to study this, and I'm going to figure out a way to self-fund this. And if I didn't succeed, it's like the creatives after me and the creative souls after me are like, you're not going to succeed. Do something acceptable. I chose a route of being abandoned and rejected and unacceptable, and failure carried so much weight that would my sister be allowed to make her own decisions? Would my cousins, would I even have kids to be able to allow them to do whatever? And I think I carried that for so long, and I had to put it down at some point. And I look around now, and the girls younger than me, I even have a cousin that went to an art school, and they're 10 years younger than I am. And I realize the impact that I've had. Also, I didn't know I was carrying that weight. It was just there. I didn't have friends. I didn't go out. I was like, why? I had to really stop. I'm like, why did you go down this path? Also, you wanted to be an artist. How did you come out a software developer? And it was chasing being acceptable and being successful in a way that gave permission to other people to say, you can actually try. And then further to that, my relationship with money is still very bad, mainly because I don't worship at its altar the way society is created to. Because I grew up I didn't grow up poor. I grew up unstable. I grew up with going to school in a Z3 in one day, and then not having food, and having family members being angry that my dad borrowed money from them the next day. Having my parents have businesses to suddenly we're living in a small house because there's no money. And it fluctuated like that. And then screaming and fighting, and everything was about money at some point, till today. And I wish it would have changed, but till today, because they inherited bad beliefs about money. And it went all the way back to the point of it swings between either worshipping money or money is the devil.
I've heard that
rich
before.
people are terrible people. But we're so poor, we can't afford anything. You need to work really hard to get money. So there were so many subconscious beliefs around it. And I stayed in survival mode for so long. And every time I had even just a little bit extra, I gave it away. To the point where someone actually, when I started talking about this on LinkedIn, said to me that we either function by carrot or by stick. So I would get myself into purchases to spend the money so that I didn't give it away, but I didn't know what to do with it. And then I was stuck in, massive interest loan payments on cars that I didn't necessarily care about all that much. And then over the years it changed, and especially getting into business and then having people to pay and then asking for money, trying to figure out how much are things worth and how much are things valued, and then how much do you pay people, how much do I take for myself. what are these ceilings? What are these limits? Until today, if someone asks me what my business model is, I don't know. I've never come from like, here's the formula and here's the spreadsheet. It was gut intuition and survival. It's like, oh, we need this much this month. I've committed to these things. And also, I could never tell my community that I came from what I'm actually worth today or how much money I've made for many reasons. And
why can't you tell them?
It's also not acceptable for a woman to be this successful. It's not celebrated. I remember, I have a lot of trauma if it's not evident. But I remember one Friday that I went home for lunch with my family, and my dad's mom was there. And I was working 2 jobs. My first name was stressed and busy, and then Sabeeha. And I went home moody as usual. Everyone just knew. Feed her and then have a conversation with her after that. And she just got on my nerves that day. She's like, why are you so tired? Why are you so busy? And I just looked at her and I was like, because your son doesn't provide, so I have to. Like, my father isn't working, you know? And I didn't say anything because you have to be respectful. And she looked me straight in the eyes and she said, you could have been married with 2 kids and happy, but you chose this life. And so much of me died where I was like, I'm not allowed to complain. I'm not allowed to talk about these things. And I was struggling then. And when I started making money, then the coin flips. Oh, look at you. You think you're better than us. You think you've made all this money. So, and then with family, being able, not telling them is because then the asks get bigger. Now it's, I smashed my car, can you get me a new car? It's, yeah, it escalates.
How do you say no?
I don't say no. I say, how can we do this together? How can I assist you? But how can I help you as well? Like, this is what
Teach a
I'm
man to
willing to
fish.
do. This is how you can do something. Let's solve the problem together. Because I went through the phase of no. I was like a toddler where everything was no. And then obviously I was alone again. So it was these cycles of connection and disconnection from back to like community, and realizing that it doesn't have to be black or white. It doesn't have to be yes or no. It's about how might we solve this? How might we come together? How can we have a discussion? And I think that's the biggest thing that's changed in my life and in my communities right now. It's that give and take comes from the fact that we have to work together to solve this. It's not on me to solve it. It's not on you to solve it alone. And I don't want to discourage anyone from asking for help either. But I now know what feels right to me and what I feel comfortable giving. So there's this like concept of a circle of consent. And when you give out of consent, that's where things like resentment and those sorts of feelings start to creep in. But when you give within consent, you feel good, because also giving feels really good. And I get dopamine from giving in whichever ways. But if it's out of consent and I'm not receiving and having it come back in whichever way, that's when it's imbalanced.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So there's a circle. Outside the circle is a no-go, but inside the circle, that's what you're willing to do.
Yeah.
And I think that shouldn't be confused with not willing to give.
Yes.
I think that is blurred lines where the no or how can I help you is mistaken for, oh, you're just a mean person who doesn't give. Flip. I think that is so helpful. Going into when you first started therapy, what could you share with us in terms of tools, frameworks to help that person who perhaps is thinking of therapy or perhaps doesn't have access to therapy? Where should they start?
So the biggest thing I learned in therapy was naming feelings. And I know how silly that sounds because I think toddlers learn this.
Do toddlers learn this?
Well, I'm on gentle parenting TikTok and I'm like, I wish I was gentle parented.
Gentle parenting?
Gentle parenting.
Okay.
Google it.
Okay.
Google it. It's actually a lot of what I've seen on there I use in my business now. It's like just how to talk to children as if they're intelligent human beings.
Because employees are kids.
No, because we are all human and we
Okay.
need to
As a
learn how to
joke.
talk to each other. Well, they are my kids, they're my cubs, and I get very mama bear. But yeah, I again didn't had to pick up leadership skills from all kinds of places. So that was definitely one of them. But for me, if you ask me how I was feeling, it was tired, hungry, or horny. And apparently those are not feelings, you know. So I remember my therapist giving me this like feeling wheel. And when I would go, she'd be like, okay, start with what color, like which group of colors, and then, okay, which word is, like there were these circles of feelings. Like you get your happy, sad, angry, and then watch Inside Out 2 or Inside Out. That's a good place to start. And then you get to more refined feelings and complex feelings of like disgust or jealousy. And that's a cross between, you know, different things like pleasure and unhappiness or whatever. Just deeply curious to understand my own feelings, and those feelings came from physical reactions initially. So it was, and mine manifested in an opposite way, which was the hard thing and why it took really long to figure it out. Was when I was angry, I would get sick in terms of like my gut. Like I would have a lot of stomach cramps and I would isolate and I would watch a lot of TV. But I was angry. Why wasn't it coming out as like, screaming, which is the natural response for anger? I was shutting it down. So mine presented as sadness.
Interesting. So if I'm understanding correctly, you suppressed, and that
Yes.
suppression led to
Yes.
a deep sadness.
Yeah.
Okay.
But actually, all I needed was a release of anger, was to say, you really upset me. And immediately I felt better. So it was literally maybe a year and a half of figuring out feelings and being able to like understand triggers and receptors. Of like, if we're having this discussion, I would have such delayed processing that like a week later I would be like, oh, that's how it made me feel. Or especially when loss happened. I remember like I've lost so many, especially when you have a family as big as mine, people pass away quite often.
Sorry for laughing.
No, it's the truth. And I mean, since I was a kid, and also because I grew up in that community, like attending funerals was what you did. And I never knew. I didn't have the processing because I was so stunted emotionally that when I was in therapy, like the loss of family members from many years ago started coming out. And I was like, oh, but I didn't cry at the funeral. Like I was there, I was helping out, I was strong. And I was like, actually, I really fucking miss them. You know, like I hate how it happened. I hate that they went to hospital one day and then came out in a coffin, you know? So yeah, it was just like basically going through my 25 plus years of experiences and systematically addressing them and figuring out where and how have these things manifested. Firstly, for me, it was physically, because like I said, my body shut down. I couldn't even deal with my mind before I could figure out how to eat, sleep, and like go like take care of myself. Once we got to that, once I felt physically healthy, then I could go like 2-3 layers deeper. And I was like, oh, okay, where is that coming from? And who said what that made me believe this? And then you start creating these patterns and trying to understand, okay, why do I believe my knee is bad? Is it my belief? Or is it somebody else's belief? And then, yeah, like you break down, you demolish all the structures, and then you start slowly rebuilding. And with each rebuild, you are now facing your current community and systems with this new version of you. And people don't like change. And then navigating that. And that's pretty much where I'm at now, if I can say, is that they don't know me now. They're like, we don't know you to react this way. We don't know you to have boundaries. We don't know you to have big feelings or to have needs. And now they don't know how to respond because they didn't do any work either. We were just in a symbiotic relationship of toxicity, and it worked because I also contributed to it working. I mean, I was in the only sort of relationship I had was with a very narcissistic man, and it worked because I was a people pleaser, because I wanted to not be rejected and abandoned. So I did and said whatever I had to stay in that until I was in therapy. And I was like, actually, this is not healthy. It's familiar, but it's not actually safe or healthy.
And that's who they prey upon.
But they don't know either. You know, it's like you want to hate someone, you want to think they're bad, but you're like, we all just adapted to the environments in which we grew up in, and then you find symbiotic relationships to continue coexisting as you are until change occurs, and then you realize, oh, we're not compatible, and maybe this is not the greatest way to live, and maybe I want more indifferent for myself now.
Wow, this is very insightful. Yeah, I guess my last question would be, what would you say to 18-year-old Sabeeha right now?
You don't have to do it alone. Yeah. Still telling that to myself today. It's been the biggest lie that I was fed, was that the fallacy of independence. It's important to an extent, but everything in moderation. Don't become extreme in any direction you're going. And trust your gut. Develop a gut and then trust it. I may not always know why something is right for me, even though it may look wrong on the outside, but even the bad things have worked in my favor. So, yeah.
Amazing. This was so insightful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you for going deep and just providing us with value. I know that there were so many tools, tricks that you shared with us from experience and, you know, what you're still learning. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much.
Cool.